I own a C124 with an M103 engine initially that I like to fiddle with, and most people thought I was crazy for fiddling with such a old car. Well, but sometimes the car makes me think I am crazy too, so it's nothing. I've done quite a bit of modifications over the years. It came with an M103 engine, a 3.0 liter. I changed it to EFI using the Speeduino firmware. I built an hardware I built my own implementation of the driver side. That's the ignition drivers and the fuel injector drivers and triggers, all those things like that. So it worked quite well. At least it was very, very reliable. I never had a problem with fueling or anything throughout 2 years in which I used that setup. So fast forward to 2019, the M103 was getting quite long in the tooth, obviously, and it was time for a swap. Is that I junk the car or I swap another engine into it? I could get another M103 or an M104 or an M111. That's the 4-cylinder engine. So I for a while I thought about putting a V engine. That's the M113, the V8, but just couldn't get enough info about how to go about the steering issue that would come up, because the W124 chassis used a steering box, and when you try putting in a V engine, the manifolds would rest on the box, and you have to figure a way around that. Some people have done it by removing the box in its entirety and putting a steering rack. So this requires quite a great deal of modification, in which I was not comfortable doing at the time. And then, or later I found out that you could use the manifold, then cut it in the middle, link it to the other side, down through the from underneath the sump, and then the 2 exhausts come out from the passenger side. But I just couldn't deal with that complexity, and I didn't want to dabble into a project that would be so long to the extent that I lose interest in it. So I opted for the M111 compressor. That is the M111.975 engine. So I went with that instead of the M104 because of the weight. Because the M104 is quite heavy, so at least heavier than the 103, which was already in the car. So I opted for the M111.975, the compressor model, which a stock configuration came with about 190 horsepower and 280 Newton meter of torque. So that's already more than the M103 3.2 engine. So in terms of horsepower and torque, and even in terms of the delivery, the torque comes on a little bit earlier in the 4-cylinder compared to the 6-cylinder. So I thought, well, while I might have close to similar horsepower at the beginning, I could just spice up the engine eventually, using the like changing the pulley ratios. So that I thought. So towards the end of 2019, I got some. I started gathering parts. I bought the engine, put it in my backyard. I got EFI controller. That's the ECU from Baldur Gislason. That's controls.is.com. I'll put all the links in the description of the video. So I got the LPC8, which was quite advanced compared to the Speeduino that I was running. I didn't want to have to fiddle with anything from that angle, because the engine is quite a little bit advanced compared to the M103. It has VVT, a electromagnetic, how will I put it? The supercharger has an electromagnet at the top, at the clutch, electromagnetic clutch, which needs actuation too. It has a bypass valve, so, and it has an electronic throttle. So I just didn't want to have to go about creating different circuits for that, which is quite possible. You could do it with other controllers, but I just didn't want to have to fiddle with that part of the project. So I got that. Now, in hindsight, a few months later, if I were to do it again, another option pop up later on. That would be the Rusefi EFI, the Microrusefi. I would put the link in the description. So this EFI controller is an open source EFI controller from from Rusefi, and they've incorporated drive-by-wire into it. So with that, it makes it a lot easier to power the M111 engine. You could also use another one in which they are currently producing now. I think it's got to a stage in which they've started producing it. I've forgotten the name for it. It even has dual drive-by-wire controllers on it. So you can check those out for cheaper options. So that's about that. So towards the end of the year, I got all these parts. Then early 2020, I decided it's time for the swap. The M111 I got wasn't a manual transmission. My car was manual transmission, so at that time I couldn't source flywheel, clutch, and a gear, the transmission. So I bought the automatic transmission along with the M111.975. So I swapped over, lengthened the drive shaft. I lengthened the drive shaft. For the swap, you need engine seats from the W124, E220, E200, the later years W124. So once you get engine seats from those, you'll be able to mount the engine. You don't need to make custom engine seats or anything like that. So I did that, got it in, got it all wired up, and the engine fired up.